Hello, shameless writers. I'm Kristen McTiernan, the nonsense-free editor, here for your weekly dose of writing wisdom. Today's video is all about avoiding a common pitfall that writers fall into. We all know Stephen King's advice that if you want to be a good writer, more specifically if you want to be a published author, you have to do two things: read a lot and write a lot. You might be surprised about how many authors I meet who brag about how much they read. They don't even watch TV. Those Netflix shows that you watch and are so invested in, they don't have time for that. They're too busy reading to hone their craft. This is laudable, and I wish I could brag the same thing. But the problem arises when you find out what they're reading. Are they reading New York Times bestsellers in their current genre that they're writing? No. Are they writing books that have set the indie world on fire in their current genre? No. The only thing that these writers are reading, and I mean the only thing, are books they've already read. Specifically, they are rereading the books of their youth. They're rereading Twilight or those Cassandra Clare books that are popular, but apparently everybody on YouTube hates them. It's all very confusing. This is a problem for all writers, regardless of how old you are. However, it is a specific problem for writers who are my age and, God forbid, older. This is a problem for writers in all genres. It doesn't matter whether you're writing sci-fi, writing fantasy, even writing nonfiction. If you're only rereading books that were popular when you were a child, this is a problem. But we're not going to be focusing on all genres of books today. We are going to be specifically focusing on YA books, and for YA authors, why they must read current bestsellers versus the YA books that were popular when they themselves were young adults. This is because for YA literature specifically, being dated is the kiss of death. I must also admit that I chose this genre because it's the only genre for which I have visual aids. You see, I don't keep hard copy books very much. I use a Kindle, I do audiobooks, and for the books that I do keep around, it's because they have sentimental value, and pretty much the only books that have sentimental value are these babies. Now, I've just shown you The Hunter, the first book in the Forbidden Games series by L.J. Smith. Now, L.J. Smith is a prolific YA author, and I believe she's still publishing books. Many of her series and novels have been turned into TV shows and movies. The Vampire Diaries, I think, is the most well-known one. I don't watch it because, But this series, and another one that she wrote as well, were very well loved. Now, you can tell by what's going on with this cover that, yes, indeed, I bought this on the shelves of Walden Books in 1994. That's when I bought this book. You can tell immediately just by looking at it. But you can also tell from the content. I don't often do dramatic readings, but in this case, one is required. From page 2, that is the second page of The Hunter by L.J. Smith, we hear about our protagonist like this. Back straight, stubbornly pretending she was perfectly calm, Jenny walked by the darkened windows. She caught a glimpse of herself in one of them. A colon. I don't approve, L.J. Smith. A slender girl with hair that Michael had once said was the color of honey in sunlight. Her eyebrows were straight, like two decisive brushstrokes, and her forest green eyes were dark as pine needles and even more serious than usual. She looked worried. This is not bad writing, but it does date itself in important ways, something I'm going to contrast now by reading from Children of Virtue and Vengeance by Tomi Adeyemi. I beg your forgiveness for mispronouncing your name, as I'm sure that's not how it's pronounced. This book is currently the #2 New York Times bestseller. Now, I would like to specify that this is just a few sentences, and it's in chapter 3. The first description that you find in this book, this current New York Times best-selling young adult novel, is in chapter 3. I know their awakened magic must come from something I did wrong in the ritual, but the sight of them always makes my throat tight. It's hard to see their white streaks and not see him. Lika! The girl's mother runs into the rain, pulling a thick yellow shawl over her head. She grabs her daughter's wrists, muscles tensing when she spots my white hair. Do you notice a difference? It's not just the difference of the modern one using first-person present tense, which I despise, but apparently is a thing now, and the older book using third person, as is proper. It's also the location of the description. L.J. Smith, back in 1994, well, that's when it was published. We don't know when she actually wrote this book. She put it right immediately at the beginning. She wants you to know on the very first page, well, the second page, exactly what Jenny looks like, because how can you care about Jenny if you don't know that she's blonde and pretty and has eyebrows like two decisive brushstrokes? She uses that phrase, by the way, in all 3 books of the trilogy. And even when I was 14, that irritated me. If I were her editor, I would strike that immediately. You know, because L.J. Smith would deign to have me be her editor. Delusions of grandeur. Not only would I recommend she get rid of that phrase, I would recommend that she get rid of the looking at herself in the reflection trope. And it is a trope, and everybody's sick of it. But that's the thing. If you're my age and you grew up reading this awesome, awesome stuff, that's how your brain is programmed to write. And so you're going to be putting that description on the first or the second page. You're going to have her be looking in a mirror, and you're going to want your reader to know going forward exactly what your protagonist looks like, because it's really important. You can't get to the action until they know what she looks like. Children of Virtue and Vengeance goes by the modern rule of thumb for description of as little as possible, just the important things, build, race, and gender, or gender identification, and have it be in line with the action. We want to know why we should care about this person, because being blonde and pretty or slim or even overweight and unkempt, regardless, why do we care about this person? Why do we care about the story? That's the focus of description nowadays, whereas in the past, description was very much important and always featured first. Additionally, there have been changes in culture. The biggest one is that in YA books, in my day, and of course long before that, there was no sex. It was absolutely not done in young adult books. Christopher Pike, who I very much enjoyed and frequently read, but did not keep any of his books because I didn't, love them. He was considered absolutely scandalous because he mentioned that the protagonist in several of his books and her friends were not virgins. They didn't have any sex scenes. There was no hanky-panky, if you know what I mean. But it was mentioned that she knew what sex felt like, she enjoyed it, she had a boyfriend, and she would like to continue having sex in the future. That alone would have gotten all of Christopher Pike's books removed from my bookshelves as a child and tossed onto the pyre. Which is why I never mentioned that fact to my parents, because I was rebellious. Nowadays, it is expected that a character's sexuality will be mentioned. In a recent book, Every Heart a Doorway, there's no actual sex in the book, but it was mentioned that the main character, whose name escapes me, even though I enjoyed the book very much, was asexual. Why did this have to be mentioned? I'm really not sure, but it always does have to be mentioned. Are they having sex? Are they not? Is it because they don't have any interest in it? Is it because they have very controlling parents? Is it because they're religious? We need to know. Sex and gender are first and foremost on every young adult reader's mind these days. So just flat skipping over it, regardless of whether you're indie or whether you intend to query an agent, unfortunately, that's just not going to fly anymore. There have also been significant changes in technology. These changes in technology are much more important now than they were when I was a young person. For instance, when I was, 13 years old, I read Ransom by Lois Duncan. As I was reading Ransom by Lois Duncan, I did not realize that this book was written in the 50s or 60s. It was a long time ago. The reason I didn't know is because the story had pretty much the same elements that they had in the 90s. The female character wore a plaid skirt and knee socks. If you've seen Clueless, you know that that was a thing when I was a teenager. They were riding a big yellow school bus. That was a thing. They were taken ransom on the school bus. No one had a cell phone. No one had a pager. No one had anything at their disposal but a landline, which is exactly the way it was for me in 1993. You cannot get away with that now, which means that the action of your book is going to be different. The tropes are going to be different. There was a problem in the early 2000s, I think everybody's gotten out of it now, where they were submitting these books about cars broken down on the roadside or situations that a cell phone would easily solve. The author thought, well, none of that happened in my books. Well, yeah, but the tropes that you grew up with aren't going to fly anymore because you've got AAA, you've got cell phones, and if you don't have a cell phone, somebody does. For indie authors, covers have changed also. Now, of course, you just saw the 1994 version of The Forbidden Game. Would you like to know what the cover looks like now? And by now, I mean the 2000 reprint. There, There it is. You see the difference, right? Bad covers for indie authors is something of a stereotype, and despite the fact that there are a million YouTube creators and a million bloggers who scream from the rooftops, indie authors, do not publish your book with a bad cover, we still do it, don't we? The first cover that I did for my time travel drama, Sunder, fell into this same problem. There it is. It's not a bad cover. It's not. It's just dated. And if you'll notice, it bears, shall we say, some similarities to this. We all have mental models in our head, and those mental models are very strongly informed by our adolescent years. Think of the music that you love most. Is it stuff that came out this year? Probably not. Your 20s? Maybe, but again, probably not. The music that you love, that you will scream at all of your car passengers to shut up when it comes on the radio. It's the stuff that came out when you were a teenager. The books that you love, the books that have informed the way that you write. It was the stuff that came out when you were a teenager. That's the thing about human brains. Nothing will ever be as good, as pure, as powerful as an adult as it was when you were a teenager. So it takes a great amount of external influence to remove ourselves from those embedded tropes and habits and comforting, joyful memories of what we read as teenagers. So what do? For one, read. Specifically, read New York Times bestsellers in the genre that you are currently writing. And I mean things that have come out in the past year or two. Of course, your book will be different in certain ways. That's okay. I'm not saying write a cookie cutter book of Cassandra Clare. What I am saying is check things like the overall length, the chapter length, the point of view. Check the tone of the book. How does it compare to yours? And if upon reading these bestsellers, and I don't just mean one, read multiple of them, read 2 to 3 a month if you can do it. For young adult books, they're relatively short. Typically, you can do 2 or 3 a month, and you need to. Take notes. If you're an indie writer, you might want to make immediate changes to your transcript. However, if you intend to query an agent, I'm going to ask you to slow your roll just a little bit for some thinking time. The reason for that is, even if you get an agent tomorrow, good luck. Even if that agent sells your manuscript to a publishing house the following week, again, best of luck. And also, give me tips. Your book will still take 2 years to hit the shelves. The publishing process is very long when you go through a traditional house. So if something is really hot right now, it might not be by the time your book hits the market. We all saw that with the vampire craze. When Twilight hit the market, especially when it hit the movie theaters, everybody and their mother was writing vampire, teenager, sparkly nonsense. But by the time movie number 3 came out, everybody was burned out on it. Nobody wanted to read it. Everybody had something nasty to say about Twilight and the author and the actors and anybody who was even remotely connected with sparkly vampires. We were all just sick to death of it. I think the kid who played Jacob, I think he's a photographer now. That's how much people hated Twilight. And I think to a certain extent still do. So check the genre, check the tropes. If you're very on trend right now, you might want to just go ahead and self-publish it and save the traditional publishing for a future work. It should probably go without saying that I highly recommend L.J. Smith's Forbidden Games trilogy. It truly was wonderful, very informative of the way that I write and the type of characters that I like. And look, I'm sorry, this is like my ideal guy. Not physically, of course, but like the bad boy, but not. He's so great. Loved The Hunter. Also, every single book that Richie Tankersley Cussick wrote before the year 2000, I have read and loved. This is The Mall by Richie Tankersley Cussick, the very first of her books that I read when I was 11, much to my mother's chagrin. She did not like it. Very much recommend it. I doubt this is what the cover looks like anymore. And this was not the first book of hers that I read, but it is my favorite. I love this book. If you want to see the trope of the girl being stalked and terrorized and everybody thinks that the girl is crazy, masterclass right here. As you can see, it is very well loved. This is what happens when you lend your books and your friend doesn't care about books and she leaves it in her book bag for 2 weeks under her heavy-ass biology bag. Marion. Legit, after that experience, every time I lent a book, it was in a Ziploc bag. And I gave this lengthy speech about how it was to be cared for. Not sorry. And finally, in other news, I wanted to let you know that I've segmented my website and my social media sites. I have my legacy sites of KristenMcTiernan.com and Kristen McTiernan on Instagram and Facebook. Those are going to stay exactly the same way. That's where all of my author business is going to be going. However, I did want to announce that I have launched NonsensefreeEditor.com. This will be the home of all of my editing services, including the ability to request a free sample to see if I am the right editor for you. Or for those of you who have placed an order with me before, you can just order right from the site without requesting an invoice from me. I do want to specify that if you're a first-time client, definitely don't use this feature. We need to get to know each other first. I also have a dedicated Instagram page and a dedicated Facebook page strictly for nonsense-free editing. So if you have editing questions about your work in progress, you will find free answers and free advice and free articles on both of those sites. And on the Instagram side of things, probably a few what I think are funny memes, but I kind of have a dorky sense of humor, so hopefully you'll find it funny too. You'll find the links to my new website below in case you have any questions or are looking for an editor. And with that in mind, until next week, take care and write well.